Hello everybody, this is Scott from Green Phantom Photography. I've been gone for a little bit, but now I'm back with some new editing videos. Right off the bat, just want to give you a heads up if my voice quality is a little bit off. I am working with a brand new microphone, and I'm just coming off of a head cold as well. So if I sound a little bit weird, it's a combination of those two things. That said, I'm also back to teaching photography, which is part of the reason I haven't gotten to record as often as I used to. Teaching is busy work. But my students have requested a few videos, and this is one of them. I'm going to do a basic sharpening technique in this video. We're not going to do a full edit. We're not going to do color correction, any of that jazz. It's just going to be straight to the point sharpening. I've even picked this photo specifically because the texture up here in the model's mask that will allow us to see the effects of the sharpening technique. So without any further blabber, let's go ahead and jump in and get to work. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do before we do anything else is we are going to duplicate our background layer. As you'll recall from previous videos, one of the things that we never ever want to do is work on this background layer. Sometimes you get really deep into an editing process and realize that you made a mistake several steps back. If you're careful about how you structure your layers, that's not a big deal, but sometimes you get into the point where you have to start over. So you always want to leave that background layer. So we have our duplicate here. Now for this particular process, we actually need a second duplicate layer. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate that. What's going to ultimately happen before this is all said and done is we're going to run a filter that we're then going to merge down to our first duplicate. So we need an extra duplicate layer. So on this very top layer, we're going to go up here to filter. Now in the past, I've sent you to sharpen and unsharp mask for sharpening. It's not a bad filter, but in the intervening time since my last recording, I've discovered a better technique that I'm going to share with you. We're going to come down here to Other, and we're going to go to High Pass. Now, High Pass is really cool in that what it does is it takes the layer and converts it to a neutral gray where you can only see the sharp lines and textures from the image. You can play with the radius to get a different level of clarity in the sharp edges and textures, but you don't want to overdo it. There's better ways to adjust the amount of sharpness once you've run the initial filter. As a general rule of thumb, I like to put the radius right about 1.5 pixels. Your mileage will vary. It'll be a little bit different from image to image, but that's a good starting point. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it at 1.5 pixels and we're going to click OK. And what that gives us is what looks almost like a charcoal rubbing of the image. Now, we're going to go over here to our blend modes, and we're going to set this to overlay. So it looks like the neutral gray layer disappeared, of course. It hasn't, but only the textures are visible. And if you look up here in the texture on the mask, if I click off the layer and back on again, and off and back on again, you'll notice that there's a difference. Now, if that's not enough sharpening for our purposes, we can simply duplicate this layer, and all of a sudden we have even more sharpening. You can play with how many layers of sharpening you want to do. My general experience at a 1.5 radius is about 2 to 3 layers of sharpening. That's working off of a Nikon D5000, which has a little bit of a soft focus, as most Nikon cameras do. You're probably not going to need as much sharpening if you're working off of a Canon camera, so just be aware of that. So I'm going to leave this at 2. I'm going to go ahead and merge it down to this layer. So now we have our sharpened layer and we have our original. And I can click off of the sharpened layer, back on, off, back on, and if you watch up in the area where there's the texture on the mask, you can see the sharpening very clearly. Again, off, back on, off, back on. So the question is, given the sharpening technique that I've used for unsharp mask before, why is this better? Well, first and foremost, you can actually adjust the level of sharpening to degrees rather than doing it all at once in a single filter, and you can kind of play with different levels of sharpening. So if you did 2 or 3, even 4 levels of the high pass filter, you could play back and forth and decide how many of those you actually need and just delete the layers you don't need. Additionally, The high-pass filter works specifically on the textures and the sharp edges, whereas the unsharp mask filter simply sharpens everything. So it's a little bit more targeted. And you get less background noise from the high-pass filter. So that's our new approach to sharpening. I'm going to be continuing my series of basic editing techniques going forward, probably with shorter videos like this rather than some of the lengthier ones I've done in the past. I've gotten requests from students for more focus on specific techniques rather than full processes, so that's probably where I'm going to focus my future videos. So if that's something that interests you, keep your eyes tuned to this channel. Go ahead, like, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and hopefully I'll have some more content for you in the very near future. Bye-bye.